There's a kind of pain that doesn't bleed, a kind of wound you can't point to with your finger, but you carry it anyway, quietly, deeply. It lives in your memory, and sometimes in the silence after someone raises their voice. I've spent a lifetime listening to people open up about these wounds, not the ones on their skin, but the ones left by words, especially when those words came from someone they trusted. You see, modern neuroscience tells us something we've known in our hearts for years. Criticism, especially when delivered with harshness, lights up the same pain centers in the brain as physical injury. Let that settle in. When someone lashes out at you with words, when they demean, embarrass, or correct without compassion, your brain doesn't distinguish much from being struck. It hurts the same. And yet, how casually we throw criticism around. How easily we believe that if someone needs to improve, then they also need to be broken first. But here's the truth. People don't grow from humiliation. They recoil. They don't rise from being shamed. They retreat, and often they remember. Because the mind doesn't just record what was said. It remembers how you made them feel. You may think you're just being honest, but if your honesty isn't wrapped in empathy, it becomes a weapon. And worse, it creates resentment, not just toward the moment, but toward you. There's a reason many people still carry the voice of an angry parent, or a harsh boss, or a teacher who said, "You'll never amount to anything." Those words etched themselves into their minds like carvings into stone. They weren't feedback, they were judgment. And when judgment replaces guidance, people don't feel corrected, they feel attacked. They close up. And over time, they start to avoid not just the person who criticized them, but the growth itself. Maybe no one told you this before, but it's possible to help someone improve without making them feel small. It's possible to express concern without crushing confidence. And it's possible to be remembered not as the voice that shamed, but as the voice that understood. If you've been wounded by criticism that cut too deep, I want you to know that moment doesn't define you. You are not the mistake they highlighted. You are the courage that continued. I remember once asking a man, an executive who had led teams for over 20 years, what he thought was the hardest part of leadership. He didn't hesitate. Dealing with mistakes, he said. Not mine, others, especially when those mistakes are costly. I asked him, "And what do you do when someone on your team fails?" He looked at me and said almost proudly, "I make sure they know it." And that, my friend, is where so many people go wrong. You see, correction is not the problem. Correction can be life-giving when it's done with care. The real issue is how we deliver it. Because correction without compassion breeds resentment. And resentment, once rooted, doesn't just block improvement, it poisons connection. It lingers. It distorts. It echoes. People replay the moment in their heads, not just what you said, but how you looked at them, the tone you used, the silence that followed, the disappointment they felt. And slowly, almost without realizing, something shifts in them. They stop offering ideas. They stop speaking up. They stop trusting you. Why? Because they no longer feel safe. Criticism, especially when harsh or public, activates a kind of mental self-defense. The brain perceives it as danger, and instead of learning, it prepares to protect. That's not a mindset for growth. It's a mindset for survival. What if I told you the most effective leaders I've known rarely used direct criticism at all? They asked questions. They offered perspective. They invited reflection. They left space for the other person to find their own error and correct it with dignity. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Because true influence doesn't come from being right. It comes from making others feel capable of getting it right. Let me ask you something. Has there ever been a time when someone believed in you more than you believed in yourself? When they offered guidance but never humiliation? When they saw your flaw but reminded you of your value anyway? You remember them, don't you? Because when someone leads with compassion, we listen. When someone corrects with kindness, we learn. And when someone respects us, even in our weakness, we change. So if you're in a position of authority over a child, a team, a partner, or even your past self, consider this. Are your words building trust, or are they building walls? Because every sentence you speak plants a seed. Let it be one of growth, not grief. There's a moment I'll never forget. It was during a quiet evening session in one of my classes. A young man stood up. He was bright, articulate, full of potential. But as he began to speak, his voice faltered. "I haven't spoken in front of a group since high school," he said, "when a teacher laughed at my presentation and told me I'd never be a leader." That moment, just a few seconds, years ago, had silenced him ever since. You see, we don't often realize the power our words carry in someone else's life. One careless comment, one burst of impatience, one sharp correction made in public, and suddenly a soul goes quiet. Not because it wasn't trying, but because it was wounded. We talk so much about strength in this world, but we forget that sensitivity is not weakness. Sensitivity is awareness. It means someone feels. It means their heart is open. And when you criticize a sensitive soul harshly, they don't fight back, they fold inward. They hide their gifts. They start believing that silence is safer than expression. But silence, when born of fear, is a tragedy. So what do? We rebuild trust. We become the opposite of what once hurt us. We learn to speak like gardeners, not judges. Because words, like seeds, grow. And some of us are still living under the shade of words spoken years ago. Think of the last time someone made a mistake near you. Did you respond with reaction or reflection? Imagine what would change in your home, your workplace, your friendships if every correction began not with blame but with curiosity. Not, "Why did you do that?" but "What were you hoping would happen?" Not, "You failed again," but "What do you think you've learned?" It's a small shift, but it opens the door to transformation. You don't need to lower your standards to lead with kindness. You simply need to elevate your awareness. Because the brain never forgets pain, but it also never forgets kindness. And the more you practice gentle leadership, the more people will lean into growth rather than running from judgment. And if you've been on the receiving end of harsh criticism, if you're carrying resentment that still burns when certain memories return, hear me. You can forgive what was said. You can let go of what was never apologized for. And you can become someone who never passes that wound forward. You don't have to repeat the cycle. You are allowed to be both strong and soft. You are allowed to expect excellence and offer grace. And you are allowed to speak truth, but only if your truth is rooted in love. There's a story I once read about a craftsman who made violins by hand. He said the wood he used for the body of the instrument had to come from trees that survived the harshest winters. The cold made the grain tighter, the fiber stronger, the resonance purer. He didn't see damage. He saw depth. He didn't discard the scarred wood. He chose it. And I believe the same is true for people. The ones who've been wounded by words but still try. The ones who carry criticism like a bruise but choose kindness anyway. The ones who once felt small and invisible and now dedicate their lives to making others feel seen. Those are the people who lead with heart, because they've lived without it. They understand the difference between correction and condemnation, between helping someone improve and making them feel unworthy. And they know this: you don't need to destroy someone to develop them. So let me speak to the part of you that wants to be better, not just in how you lead others, but in how you speak to yourself. Yes, criticism can create resentment, but compassion creates responsibility. When someone feels respected, they want to grow. When they feel safe, they seek feedback. And when they feel loved, they listen, not out of fear, but out of trust. That's what leadership truly is. Not the ability to correct perfectly, but the wisdom to connect deeply. Not the authority to command, but the grace to care. Not the urge to point out flaws, but the patience to wait while others rise. So from this moment forward, I invite you to lead differently. Speak in ways that heal, not just teach. Pause before reacting, and breathe before responding. See people not as problems to fix, but as souls in progress. And most of all, remember this: you have the power to make someone feel whole again, just by the way you don't say what everyone else does. Just by offering silence when judgment would be easy. Just by saying, "You're more than this moment." That is leadership. That is presence. That is legacy.